Hello, welcome. Uh, this is, I'm Cindy, first of all. This is the final session in this Peace for the Peacemakers series. It's been a really interesting and fun for me to think about what people might be needing um, when they are trying to overcome so much uh, bullshit, for lack of a better word, in the world right now. And uh, I think that probably yoga philosophy seems a little esoteric. So this is maybe the least popular class in this series, and that's totally understandable. But I really think that teaching, giving a Dharma talk, or teaching philosophy is one of the most interesting, but also really um, meaningful parts of my uh, dharma, or my duty and role as a yoga teacher. The past 8 years, I've been teaching the yoga philosophy section of the Kaizen 200-hour yoga teacher training program, and every year, just through my own personal practice and self study, I find that I have an enhanced and different perspective, and that I am able to communicate sort of less and less on the surface of things and more practically and applicably. So to me, it's really a big part of my personal practice, and really thank you guys for being interested enough to check this out. um, because through some serendipity, fortunately, the this class only had people who wanted to attend uh, on their own time, so not live, which kind of works out because I was dealing with a lot of technical issues. And as you can see right now, as I'm making this recording, you can't see my face, and that's because my webcam's not working. So it's been a bit of a mess, but in some ways that's good because I can really take time uh, to make this a little bit more meaningful and better and richer for you, I think. Um, and so let's start talking about the path of yoga as a path to individual and collective liberation. And what does that mean for people who are engaged in social and environmental justice, people who are doing really important work? So let me talk about what you're going to see, and you'll notice a lot of Sanskrit terms here that you might not recognize, and I promise to define them for you. I'll also send you the slides so that you can review them at your leisure. But we're going to initially talk about the concept that is at the core of all Vedic and yogic thought, um, and Buddhism and Hinduism, Jainism, uh, lots of the philosophy and religion that comes from this time and place, and that is avidya and vidya. So I will talk to them. I will define these terms for you, of course, and talk about them in a bit of detail. And that's the sort of prerequisite knowledge that you need to start analyzing yoga as a system to use for activism. And then we will talk about, maybe these two are familiar to you: ahimsa, which is nonviolence, and satya, which is truthfulness. Finally, a bit of a big topic, which is dharma, and that's our life's purpose, our life's role. And finally, seva. Seva is selfless service. It's less of a philosophical concept and more of a practice that people who believe in these ideas, it's a practice that they engage in. So let's begin. Avidya versus vidya. Let's talk about it. So, avidya simply means ignorance. Actually, in Sanskrit usually means not, um, kind of anti. So, avidya is not knowledge, it's the opposite of knowledge, which is ignorance. And ignorance is at the core of all of the philosophy leading up to the practice of yoga. So this is, you know, over 2,000 years of thought. Um, Basically, at the core of yoga philosophy is this idea that humans lack understanding of our true nature and the true nature of reality, the true nature of the universe. And because we don't understand ourselves, we have mistaken our identity and therefore behave and think in ways that cause suffering to ourselves and to others. And on the contrary, we have vidya. Vidya is knowledge. So the path of yoga is a path to enlightenment, right? And so in yoga, literally removal of ignorance, path of wisdom is moksha, a path to freedom. Moksha, meaning, yeah, meaning kind of both enlightenment and freedom. Freedom from ignorance is always what we're talking about when we say freedom in yoga. And this is because the main aspect of avidya is that it creates a false sense of duality. Because of avidya, because I'm in this human body where I'm forced to look out my eyes and I feel like I'm inside this body and I am this body and everything else is outside of me, uh, that makes us believe, logically so, that there's separation between everyone and everything, that we are only individuals, that we are never really collective, right? However, this duality in yogic thought is a falsehood. So now you can sort of see how we're trapped by suffering because of ignorance, because I believe that I'm alone when I'm not really alone. I'm suffering from loneliness and isolation that doesn't actually exist. I believe that other people are so different than me, then I suffer from feeling alienated, right? But actually, uh, we have differences, of course, but at our core, our true nature is oneness, and therefore we could be connecting, but we're actually separate. And this is the cause of suffering that traps us. This is also why we have fear of death and all these other things. And this is why we're suffering, and that's why knowledge is freedom in the yogic worldview. Excuse me. So we seek liberation through awareness. Yoga is the process of moving from avidya or ignorance towards vidya or knowledge in order to find personal liberation from suffering, but also collective liberation, because this knowledge teaches us that we are not separate. Suddenly, my liberation is tied to the liberation of all beings and all people. And so you can see that yoga is very much in line with, um, collectivist kinds of thought, um, social movements that move towards liberation for others, caring for people who are marginalized, all of that kind of stuff is very much in line with yogic thinking. And therefore it's linked to activism, and your activism, your personal politics can indeed become your yoga. So yoga is not something that only happens on the mat. in the studio, right? It's not just a physical practice, but it's an ethical practice. It's a practice of knowledge gaining, and therefore your work engaging in social or economic or environmental justice work enhances your understanding of the interconnectedness between us, therefore dissolves this ignorant idea of duality and enhances your ability to be compassionate, and therefore your activism is your yoga, right? So you're already doing it, and they are very linked. Anyone who tells you, you know, that you just need to find your bliss and you just need to close your eyes and breathe and take care of yourself, only yourself, and that by meditating all day that you're doing great yoga, without engaging actively in reducing suffering for other beings. We call that spiritual bypassing, right? Spiritual bypassing is when, especially in the wellness world, uh, we find our zen and ignore all of the things happening, as if by me meditating by myself and becoming, free in some way, is good enough. And this is, yeah, ignoring the suffering of others, not engaging in compassion. And this also would be your toxic positivity, right? Good vibes only. We're not going to talk about things that bring the vibes down. All of this is not really yoga because it is actively engaging in willful ignorance, right? So authentic yoga should be active and it should be activist, it should be progressive. Right. So, at the core of the behaviors and belief systems that we practice in yoga to clear our minds and clear our energy and, scrub away these layers of ignorance on our own consciousness is ethical precepts. They're called yama and niyama, the things that you should do, things you should not do, right? And this is the beginning of all yoga. So many people access yoga by stepping on the mat first, right? Doing some physical exercise. But generally speaking, your ethical living prepares you for accessing more benefit in your physical practice, in your meditation practice, because it is calming and clearing and creates peaceful relationships, less drama, all of these things. So, the first commandment of yogic ethics is ahimsa, right? Like we talked about before, is a negator. So, ahimsa is nonviolence, non harm. And it's quite strict, actually. It involves nonviolence in thought, word, and action towards all living things, every every living thing, and that is possibly not possible, not always possible, right? But it's an ideal. It's not. Um, you're not going to achieve all of these things necessarily in one lifetime, according to yogic thought. We get lots of chances, so. Uh, you know, we keep working on it. But you probably recognize this idea of ahimsa, because if you're familiar with the work of anyone who does like nonviolent resistance, ahimsa is at the core. It's a kind of combination between maybe uh, the words of Jesus Christ in the New Testament, turning the other cheek kind of talk, and also yogic and Vedic thought. So But let's get back to the roots. We just talked about vidya and avidya, right? And um, avidya, ignorance, makes us believe that we are separate from others, but vidya, knowledge, teaches us that the world is not based in duality. It's non-dual world. Anything that happens to me also happens to others or affects others and vice versa. So harming others harms the self. And since we are all connected, we're all one, compassion and empathy serves everyone. So, as I was saying, if you're an activist, you have heard of these things before. We can actually use nonviolent behaviors to disrupt and point at violent behaviors, right? If the state is behaving violently towards nonviolent protesters, this can be useful in resistance to oppressive systems. And probably of the work of Gandhi, um, which is heavily based in yogic philosophy and ahimsa in particular. And then many of Gandhi's techniques would have been taken and adjusted for different situations throughout the world, maybe in apartheid South Africa or in the United States and civil rights movement, for example. Nonviolent resistance, nonviolent communication and dialogue methods, and also self-development, um, enlightening oneself, developing compassion, but also for learning to be non-reactive, right? To be able to sit with uncomfortable or frightening situations. These are all practices and systems that have come from ahimsa, right? Um, do you want to recognize? We'll talk about dharma more later, but uh, ahimsa is, as I said, idealistic, and especially if your role in society is to disrupt oppressive systems, you may encounter situations, right, where uh, behaving in nonviolent ways is dangerous to yourself or others, right? Where it's not going to be the best possible choice. We might have to engage in self defense, for example. And so, important to note that yoga is not dogmatic. Yoga is supposed to be analyzed by uh, the aspirant, by the person who's studying it. You're not supposed to just blindly accept things. In fact, because it's based on dismantling ignorance, uh, we should always be questioning: Is this the right thing to be focusing on right now? So we'll talk about that later. But I did want to mention it because I know this can be a point of contention. Um, but also reminding everyone, I'm sure you know very well, that, when we say nonviolent, we don't mean passive, right? We don't mean spiritual bypassing. We mean resisting, uh, you know, without lashing out, resisting by being non reactive, but being very much present and disrupting systems in nonviolent ways. Ahimsa is, I always recommend my students to pick like one of the yamas in yoga, one of these ethical concepts, and just focus on it for a while, sort of practice it, pay attention to it, and see what you notice, what that does to your thinking. And so, as a yogic practice, simply paying attention. Is this violence? Is this thought violence to myself or others? How could I shift away from this violent action or thought? It is a way to develop our concentration and attention, and it encourages us to be flexible, right? We can adjust our thoughts and our language to avoid harming others and ourselves. And this can be like a small seed we practice in our personal life. It can actually lead us into sort of more political action, more political awareness. Especially think about this idea of language, right? If one person is wanting to be actually kind and compassionate to others. There's a word that they tend to use, and they find out, maybe they didn't know before, that this word is harmful, that it causes pain and suffering to others, and other words are available. This word is not necessary for them to use. They might start with the personal action, right? A shift away from using it in their personal life might actually develop more critical understanding of the way that systems are oppressive, or what are people going through right now that could lead them into um, more active participation in the broader society. And ahimsa is, again, not just personal, but because of non duality, because of this concept, it's always collective, right? So we have a collective responsibility towards each other. And that means that if I truly believe in ahimsa, nonviolence, it's not enough for me to be actively not causing harm or not consciously causing harm, but I must notice where harm is being done around me and speak out and act against that violence, um, whether through boycotts or protests or political action within systems, outside of systems, etc. I have some responsibility to intercede. Right. Along the same lines, so when we talk about yama and niyama, things you should do, things you should not do, in yogic ethics, ahimsa is first and therefore primary, right? So therefore most important. And the second one is satya. So these are the two primary ethical considerations. If you would like to find out more about all of the yama and niyama, all of the ethical underpinnings of yoga, I do recommend first and foremost the Yoga Sutras. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras outlines briefly each of them. And if you get a Yoga Sutra translation that also comes with commentary on the sutras, you can learn quite a lot about what is the intention behind them. But today we'll be talking just about these two. So, satya is truthfulness. And what does that mean? Commitment to honesty and integrity and truthfulness in both speech and action, as well as commitment to the path of moksha, right? Path towards freedom, path of revealing ignorance and dismantling the ignorance of duality. I think importantly, our actions and our speech should match our beliefs of what is true, right? But it's an active process. We're always seeking to understand more, understanding that we don't know everything. And so we try to reveal the truth to ourselves and then act in accordance to it. Um, when we talk about the broader society or more sort of practical matters, we want to be always looking out for the truth about justice and injustice in society, right? So if we want social change, we have to be asking for transparency in our governments. We have to be looking out at the actions, for example, of politicians. Um, you know, CEOs, etc., do their actions line up with their speech, right? And then holding people accountable. So it's not just personal, but much like with ahimsa, starting with the personal can be um, can be really useful in understanding how things can shift when we are committed to thinking, is this true? Right? Um, is this really true, or do I just feel like it's true? Is this really true? Uh, or is this behavior really in line with my values, etc.? And so, when it comes to speaking one's own truth, commitment to this principle encourages authenticity, honesty, and expression, and also encourages us to not remain silent, right? So, a typo. Oh my God. Okay. Speaking of my failure. All right. So, we don't want to remain silent in the face of ignorance when we see things, this sort of double speak, propaganda, all of that kind of stuff. We want to speak out about it. We want to reveal what is not true. We want to share knowledge with others. And we want to recognize when someone is speaking the truth, but they're not being heard for whatever reason, and amplify uh, the voices of those who might not have a platform for speaking their truth, right? So when we notice that people in marginalized communities are trying to share truth, but they're not being heard for various reasons, we leverage our privilege to amplify their truth. And even recognizing that you have privileges is part of living in accordance with Satya, right? Not trying to be willfully ignorant. Um, Complexity. So if you're really practicing Satya, you're going to understand that oversimplifications are not really honest, that most things are somewhat complex, that there's nuance, right? There's various perspectives. However, we're also going to recognize that there can be false duality or false dichotomy, false complexity, right? We are all um, aware of issues that are not actually controversial, but presented as if there are two equally uh, equally relevant sides, right? So recognizing the difference between whether something is nuanced and gray or whether it's truly been figured out already, but someone is trying to convince us that it is more complex than it is. Um, and of course, this is tied to ahimsa or non harm, right? So we, you know, kind of in line with the speaking, not using language that harms others. Uh, Even if you're still at a point in your development where you believe that the language that you're using is true, you recognize that it could be more nuanced than you believe, and you prioritize people's safety and their well-being over being correct, right? Especially when it's a small thing for you to do and it makes a big difference for others. So there's a reason for the order of ahimsa before satya. A big one, dharma. What's your dharma? Dharma refers to one's duty, one's purpose, and also their responsibility, right? And to be perfectly honest, uh, the concept of dharma mm, has been misused in some societies to control people, right? So we should be careful about making assumptions about dharma or being told what our role in society is without reflecting on it ourselves. I think that that's important, right? Um, Even looking at, where these concepts come from in the world, as most of us know, there has been, um, a discriminatory caste system in India, right? That cause real harm to people because there's sort of no mobility through sort of these very distinct stratifications of social uh, class and order. Um, and even though much of that is illegal now, there's still repercussions from this like stratification of society. And a lot of that was excused or encouraged to continue to be followed by calling it dharma. You're born into this role. This is how you participate in this society, right? This is your place in society. So you're doing good if you do what you're meant to do, right? So we do want to be careful with this idea that you have a specific life purpose, that you have a specific responsibility to the broader society. Um, it's really about a combination of your true nature, your personal nature, and your abilities and knowledge and talents, as well as how you fit into your community or society. And therefore it's flexible, right? It changes as you change, as you learn certain things. You know, I believe my dharma is teaching, but but I taught English in Korea for many years, and I don't believe that that's my dharma. But all of my work that I've ever done in my life that I've been proud of or that I feel really good about is some kind of communication or teaching, right? Um, and one of the main things that I've been learning my whole life is about yoga and movement. So, teaching movement, communicating through dance or performance, my physical body, and teaching yoga. I believe this is in line with my dharma versus teaching wealthy kids who don't want to learn English in an academy. That's not my dharma. So it's flexible and it's also nuanced. It involves a lot of self-reflection. So when we come into talking about activism, if you self-reflect and understand your value systems, your talents, your privileges, and your understanding of the society around you, then you can sort of find your dharma, right? And this helps you engage in work that resonates with your values and also your abilities. And considering ahimsa, non harm, and satya, or truthfulness, you're following the dharma. It can shift over time. So, for example, when I talked about the caste system, if societal roles are not ethical or they're based in avidya, ignorance, then we don't follow them or it's not our dharma to do so, right? Um, and, you know, if we live in an ethical society or uh, we live in some kind of utopia, then anything we can do to make society run more smoothly is part of our dharma. So it's quite flexible and we have to self reflect. Under mutual support, understanding that Dharma is interconnected, like all things, and each person doing their duty, their role in society, works together to increase good. This understanding fosters interconnectedness and and fosters a balance between individual and collective responsibility, uplifting everyone in the community, right? So, you know, if we oversimplify this into like a metaphor, right? Uh, let's look at inanimate objects. In Vedic thinking, everything, not just everyone, has dharma. Um, for things, it's much easier to follow their dharma than it is for people, right? But look at the sun. The sun's dharma, you know, is to hold the solar system together with its gravitational force. The sun's dharma is to uh, radiate and shine down on or out into space. Uh, Therefore, the sun's connected to the earth. There's plants on the earth. Their dharma is to take sunlight, turn it into food, and then exhale oxygen, right? If the sun stops doing its dharma, then the plants will die. If the plants stop doing their dharma, then the animals will die, like this. Um, so the belief in yogic philosophy is that humans' dharma is similar. It doesn't mean that we're like preordained to do specific things, but when we, for example, are slaves to capitalism, when we're just working for someone else without following our own ability and joy and purpose, with no sense of purpose, how are we harming the planet, right? We tend to harm the planet. We tend to harm others. We become complicit in systems that do harm, right? If your dharma is to have a small, like a small business to like feed others, for example, then working in an office is antithetical to your dharma, and it's also taking the good that you could do out of the equation and adding more negative things into the world. So it's a bit complex, but being aware of it, thinking about it, is that's the most we can do, right? When we're doing yoga practice, in philosophy, yoga practice is just learning about these concepts and then thinking about how they affect us and how we can engage with them if we want to. And just thinking about these things does change slowly over time the way that you behave in the world. Um, Complexity. So I spoke about this when talking about ahimsa, right? Um, if your dharma is uplifting, protecting, empowering others, and you live in under unjust and violent systems, then there will be situations where you have to choose. Do I use nonviolent principles here? Or if my duty is to protect others, do I not use this one right now and instead focus on my dharma to protect, right? Um, and that means I might behave in a way that is violent, for example. If I'm committed to truthfulness, but I can, you know, lie to an immigration officer, uh, I'm going to try the lying, right? I'm going to prefer to not talk about knowing someone, or I'm not going to rat out my neighbors, etc. Right? Sometimes being quote dishonest, technically, is doing your dharma, especially if it also is doing ahimsa, if it's protecting someone from harm. So all of these things are very complex, right? If you are in a lot of danger where you live, for example, uh, putting your head down, be staying under the radar may feel antithetical to what you believe, right? It might not seem authentic. However, it could be what keeps you safe so that you can move on to the next step where you could do more good, right? So all of these things have complexity. Um, there are there are no perfect ethical systems among all of human history, right? Um, but if anything, yoga is flexible. You know, yogic belief mm, uh, does not punish you. Like even when we factor in ideas of karma, karmic debt, doing actions that do harm, create karma, whatever. I'm not going to go too far into that, but even within that idea, there's no real punish and reward system because if you're seeking, liberation, doesn't matter how long it takes. You just work towards liberation, right? And there's no one there to be like, oh, you're evil or you're wrong or you should be punished. That's not really how yoga works. So we recognize there's complexity here, um, and we roll with that. All right. Yeah, thank you for staying with me as I ramble. It's really fun to talk about these things, and I hope that some of it is useful or inspiring to you in some way. Um, so let's talk about seva. Seva is service, specifically engaging in service without expectation for personal gain or attachment to outcomes. So, very important text in Hindu, Vedic, yogic thought is Bhagavad Gita, and the Gita teaches us that we do our dharma, right? We do our duty without expectations or attachment to the outcome, and this selfless action is yoga, right? This is called karma yoga. And this is really, before the 20th century, all of the postures and meditation that kind of yoga was really considered for people who renounce uh, society, who go out into the caves and the wilderness and live outside of society, and they do their exercises and their meditation to find enlightenment. And for regular people, the way of doing yoga, the way of working towards moksha, was, you know, basically through action, selfless action, through doing their duty in a compassionate, loving way, through following non-harm, but also just if they felt their dharma was to be a mother, then they focus on being a mother without attachment to outcomes, and that was yoga. So only later in the modern era that we sort of lumped the active yoga in with the spiritual yoga and repurposed it for sort of regular people uh, all together. And part of that was just simply to make it more appealing when it was exported out of India into the other parts of the world, but also because in the modern era people live different lives than they did before, and things like the physical aspect of yoga became really important to people who suddenly were sitting and working in offices or factories or whatever. Very different than in the past, when they might have had a more physical lifestyle, and sort of religious and devotion to duty were more important methods, or more accessible methods. Now we sort of mix them all together. Seva is a kind of specific kind of karma yoga where not just doing your dharma, not just doing your duty, but you're actually engaging in service to others. Again, without any expectation for what the outcome of that might be. Um, and of course, this is integral for developing community relationships. Um, it is a form of mutual care. and uh, relying on each other, which, as we probably know from a lot of ideas that you might be familiar with if you're in a progressive space, that this diminishes the power of governments or corporate structures who, want us to be dependent upon them instead of for others. But it also fosters kindness. It's good for mental health, all of these things. Communities who value compassionate care and service without personal gain heal their communities from the effects of injustice and can, yeah, can shift systemic imbalances on small scales. Removing the idea of attachment to outcomes is important for this to work well because when we see social safety nets being attacked, from governments, right? Uh, a lot of the times the way that they kind of get away with attacking them or dismantling them is by saying that these services are misused, right? Used by people who don't really need them or used in ways that they weren't intended, right? That the effects are not what are intended, so we're going to take them away. Um, when trying to build community and do mutual care in a community, uh, it serves us and it serves our community, and it serves to dissolve this idea of duality, right? And remind us that we're all one by when we detach from attachment to outcomes, when we give without caring what becomes of what we've given. And therefore, we protect these kinds of social services within our communities because they certainly can't be threatened by anyone saying, like, oh, but that person is going to use it for XYZ, right? Who cares? We don't care. We believe that giving to each other is always beneficial if we can do so. Um, So for activists, many times your activism is seva, is service. It's a practice of compassion without attachment to outcomes, and this is really important for maintaining hope and preventing burnout because many of the things that you fight for may not be realized within your lifetime. But that doesn't mean that you should stop fighting for them, right? Um, because we consider ourselves part of the broader community because we're all one. um, that that sort of puts us in community even with people who haven't been born yet, right? Future generations. We want to care beyond ourselves. Then we don't give up when we notice that the thing that we're fighting for is not coming right away. And it's a reminder that you're doing service and develops solidarity and strength within communities, which we talked about, which it just creates good relationships and trust between people. It's also important for the self liberation, cultivates feelings of humility and gratitude. Uh, when I give something without expecting to be thanked, I'm practicing humility, right? Uh, and because I participate in a society where people do this, I have the opportunity also to receive. And I practice gratitude because I don't have an expectation of receiving from others, just like I don't have an expectation of being thanked when I give, right? Um, it also enhances social connection, and this is good for mental health. Generally, a sense of peace and, yeah, vidya, knowledge of non duality. That was a lot. That was a lot. So, definitely, look over these things in your own time. Um, but Before I leave you, there we go. Before I leave you, I want to share this mantra with you. So, if you don't know about mantra are Sanskrit um, prayers or lines of Sanskrit texts that have auspicious meanings and which uh, are also believed to have like energetic effect, right? So the language of yoga is Sanskrit, and Sanskrit is believed to have resonance, right? The sounds and syllables of Sanskrit words have an effect on the mind and body. Whether or not that's true, most mantra have positive meaning. And this particular one and is one of the mantra that is a peace mantra. So there are several of these kind of like Om Shanti Shanti mantras with different words above them. Shanti means peace in Sanskrit, and this particular one, the meaning is may all be happy, may all be well, may all be free from disease, may all be safe from harm, and may all beings be free from suffering. Um, this one may all be safe. Also, I've seen may all recognize that which is auspicious, right? May we all have access to good luck, basically. Um, and this is called a mantra of universal peace. So I'm going to play it because I won't subject you to my chanting, but let's listen to it.
सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामया सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः।
Mm. Thank you so much for listening to me talk for an hour about this stuff. And I really appreciate everyone who participated um, in this first series that I did with online classes. This stuff is new to me, but I really want to share yoga with people independent of whether they are in my area and at reasonable and accessible prices. Um, I am going to be bundling up all of these videos, I think, and putting them on my coffee account so that people can purchase the whole bundle. But if you registered already, then I happily am sending these directly to your inbox. And I do hope that you enjoy and revisit this yoga philosophy, whichever of the videos do something for you, give you something. And yeah, thank you for letting me share yoga with you. Thank you for being willing uh, to support um, Palestinian freedom. And I do have a little reading list for you, very short. If you're interested in finding out more about the stuff I talked about, recommending these three books. So, Bhagavad Gita. Uh, this translation is quite accessible. Yoga Sutras and The Tree of Yoga by B.K.S. Iyengar, which is really very quick and easy read and describes basically what is in these Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So, a very basic reading list of yoga philosophy that I do hope that you dig into a little bit more. So, thanks again for sharing with me. Hari Om Tat Sat. Be well.